They said I was overreacting,
This is
that I was
serious.
imagining things,
You need to
that the
read this
HOA
now.
was just doing its job. But when you're fined for wind chimes, ignored by your neighbors, and watched like a criminal in your own front yard, it's not paranoia. It's a setup. What started as a simple refusal to sell my house for my sister's reckless debt turned into a full-scale war against a corrupt HOA, a neighborhood conspiracy, and a betrayal I never saw coming. This isn't just my story. It could be yours, too. So if you've ever felt powerless against the system, stay with me. You're about to see how one voice, backed by truth, can take down an entire machine. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you're ready to stand up for yourself, and share this with anyone who needs to hear it. Now, let me tell you how it all began. It started on an ordinary Tuesday. I remember because I was halfway through brewing coffee when my sister, Rachel, called me with that tone. You know the one. Sweet, but sticky. Like syrup covering something rotten. I hadn't spoken to her much in the past few years, not because I didn't love her, but because she always seemed to find herself in some new disaster, and I was tired of playing the cleanup crew. She didn't waste time. Hey, listen, I need a huge favor. My stomach sank. I asked her what was wrong, and she launched into a story that sounded like something out of a bad Netflix drama. Apparently, she'd taken out a massive loan, something to do with a business opportunity that fell through, and now the collectors were circling like vultures. She said she was going to lose everything unless she could come up with $200,000 immediately. Then came the real kicker. I was thinking, maybe you could sell your house. It's in your name, you've built up equity, and you live there alone. It's just temporary. Once I'm back on my feet, I'll help you buy another place. I froze. Was she seriously suggesting I give up the only stable thing I had to bail her out of a financial mess she created? This house wasn't just a property. It was mine. I worked for it. Every cracked tile, every repainted wall carried my blood, sweat, and stubbornness. I told her no, firmly. Rachel didn't take it well. She went from sweet to seething in seconds, accusing me of being heartless, selfish, and ungrateful. She reminded me of how our parents always helped me when I struggled. She cried, then she hung up. At first, I thought that would be the end of it. Awkward, painful, but over. I didn't realize that refusing to sell my house would start a war, one I never saw coming, because what I didn't know yet was that Rachel had friends in places I didn't even think to look, and some of them were sitting on the HOA board. The silence after Rachel hung up was almost louder than the fight itself. I stared at my phone, still processing what had just happened. It wasn't the first time she'd asked for help, but this felt different. It wasn't just impulsive, it was calculated, like she expected me to say yes and had already planned everything around it. For a few days, I tried to push the conversation out of my mind. I kept to my routine, work, walks, fixing up the backyard, but something felt off. Then came the texts, paragraphs at a time, each one laced with guilt, shame, and passive aggression. She told me I was turning my back on family, that I was leaving her to drown. She even brought up childhood memories, like the time she gave me her lunch money in middle school, as if that somehow equaled a down payment on my house. Then came the calls from our extended family, cousins, aunts, people I hadn't heard from in years, suddenly reaching out to ask why I was refusing to help. I could tell they had only heard one side of the story, and it wasn't mine. Rachel painted herself as a victim, someone abandoned by her only sibling in a time of desperate need. But what she didn't say was how many times I'd helped her before. I'd loaned her money. I'd bailed her out of rent. I'd co-signed for a car that she stopped paying off, leaving me with the fallout. This wasn't a one-time crisis. It was a pattern. Still, I tried to be civil. I offered to help her in smaller ways, job leads, budgeting advice, even a few $100s. But it was never enough. To her, I was either saving her or betraying her. There was no in-between. The breaking point came a week later. I got a letter, not an email or a call, but an actual letter, dropped in my mailbox. It was from Rachel, handwritten, pages long. She said she was done with me, that I had chosen a house over my own blood, that when things got worse, and she was sure they would, I shouldn't dare come crawling back asking for forgiveness. I read it twice, then I put it away and didn't look at it again. What I didn't know was that while our relationship was burning down in private, Rachel was setting fires elsewhere, and some of those fires were catching in places far too close to home. Because not long after that letter, the HOA showed up on my doorstep. It started subtly, a note taped to my front door. Reminder: trash bins must be brought in within 12 hours of pickup. I found it odd because my bins were already inside. I shrugged it off, figuring maybe they were doing a general neighborhood sweep. But then, 2 days later, I got another notice, this time in the mail, a formal warning about my lawn. Apparently, it was not in compliance with community standards. I walked outside and stared at my front yard. The grass was trimmed, the bushes neat. It wasn't a golf course, sure, but it was far from unkempt. Still, I let it go. Maybe someone complained. Maybe the HOA was cracking down early that year, but it didn't stop. The next week, I received a fine, $150, for unauthorized exterior decoration. The decoration? A wind chime I'd had hanging on my porch for 3 years. It had never been an issue before. That's when it clicked. This wasn't normal. It wasn't random. Someone had flipped a switch. I tried calling the HOA office, hoping to get some clarity. The woman who answered sounded polite enough, until I mentioned my name. Then her tone changed. She told me any questions or appeals needed to be in writing, and that the board had already reviewed the complaints. Complaints? I asked. From who? She didn't answer, just told me to refer to the guidelines and ended the call. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Rachel, about the timing, about how quick all of this had escalated after our fallout. And then I remembered something she said on the phone before she hung up. "You'll regret this." I went digging. I pulled out the old HOA newsletters, scanned the names of the board members, and there it was, Jennifer L., Vice President of the board. Jennifer was Rachel's old college roommate. They used to be inseparable. I hadn't seen her in years, but I remembered the two of them always scheming, always in each other's business. I hadn't made the connection before because Jennifer had gotten married and changed her last name. Now things were making sense. Rachel didn't just get mad, she got strategic. She couldn't force me to sell, but she knew people who could make living in my home a nightmare. People who could bury me in fines, complaints, and bureaucracy until I broke. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, they were weaponizing them, and I was now the target. The next month was a relentless barrage. Every few days, I'd receive a new citation from the HOA, each one more ridiculous than the last. One accused me of having discolored shingles on my roof. Never mind that it had passed inspection just months earlier. Another claimed I had an unapproved garden feature. That feature? A bird bath that had been there since I moved in. I tried to fight back the logical way. Paperwork, emails, appeals. I took photos, attached documents, cited HOA guidelines. But it didn't matter. Every appeal was denied. Sometimes I didn't even get a response. It was like yelling into a void. Except this void kept draining my bank account. At one point, I had over $1,000 in fines, and they just kept stacking. Then came the noise complaints. A letter arrived claiming that neighbors had reported excessive noise after hours. I live alone. I don't throw parties. I work early. The only thing loud in my house was the kettle, and even that wasn't getting any action with how stressed I was. The complaint was followed by a warning. Continued disturbances could result in legal action. I knew exactly what was happening. Someone, maybe multiple people, were filing false reports, and the HOA, instead of verifying any of it, was rubber stamping them into fines and threats. I felt paranoid. Every time I stepped outside, I wondered who was watching. Was it the old couple across the street who suddenly stopped waving? The guy 2 doors down who stared a little too long when I pulled into my driveway? It felt like the entire neighborhood had turned into a set of eyes pointed straight at me. I started documenting everything. I set up security cameras. I logged each letter, each fine, each unreturned call. I even started recording my conversations with the HOA. I wasn't going down quietly. Then things got even pettier. One day, I came home to find my mailbox wide open with a citation taped inside. Grass height exceeds 3 inches. I knelt down and measured it myself. It was 2.5 inches. I took a photo with a ruler next to it. The next day, another fine. The message was clear. They didn't care about rules. They cared about pressure. I realized they were hoping to break me financially and emotionally, get me to throw up my hands and just leave. Or, better yet, sell. Rachel's plan wasn't just revenge. It was strategic eviction, using the HOA as the weapon. But I wasn't going to give her, or them, that satisfaction. At first, I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. People change, I thought. Maybe it's just awkward timing, but deep down, I knew something was off. The neighbor who used to chat with me about her roses suddenly avoided eye contact. The man who'd borrowed my ladder last fall didn't return my wave. Even the neighborhood kids, who used to ride their bikes past my house laughing, now crossed to the other side of the street. It was like I'd become radioactive. I found a flyer in my mailbox one evening. It looked official, formatted like an HOA newsletter, but there was no signature, no attribution. It talked about preserving the integrity of the neighborhood and how some homeowners are no longer aligned with our values. It didn't mention me by name, but it didn't have to. Every passive-aggressive phrase was a dagger aimed straight at me. Then came the notes. They weren't direct threats, but they were close. Folded pieces of paper slipped under my doormat or taped to my garage. Why don't you do the right thing? One said, "This used to be a nice place," read another. My favorite? Some people don't belong here anymore. It felt like a campaign, one I hadn't signed up for and couldn't opt out of. I began to notice little things that never used to happen. My trash bins would be knocked over in the middle of the night. My sprinklers, somehow, were tampered with. Packages I ordered mysteriously disappeared. When I brought it up to the HOA, silence. They said it was outside their jurisdiction. The social freeze hurt more than I expected. These were people I'd shared block parties with, who'd asked me for recommendations on local handymen, who used to compliment my front porch decor. Now, I was the outcast, not just because of the fines, but because someone had poisoned the well. Rachel hadn't just manipulated the HOA. She had poisoned my image to the community, turned me from neighbor to nuisance. There was one moment that hit especially hard. I was watering the plants one Saturday morning when a woman walking her dog stopped at the edge of my property. She stared at me, then shook her head slowly and muttered, "Shameful." Just loud enough for me to hear. I didn't say a word. I just turned off the hose and went back inside. But that was the moment I knew something had to change. They thought they could isolate me, pressure me, force me out through shame and silence. But I wasn't leaving, and I wasn't staying quiet anymore. After weeks of silent treatment, unjust fines, and veiled hostility, I decided it was time to stop playing defense. I wasn't just going to endure this, I was going to figure it out. I wanted to know exactly who was behind the pressure campaign, who was filing the complaints, and why the HOA board was treating me like public enemy number one. The first thing I did was request copies of all complaints filed against my property. Under our HOA bylaws, I was legally entitled to see them. They dragged their feet, of course, sent me to voicemail 3 times, claimed the records weren't immediately accessible, and insisted I file a formal written request. So I did, certified mail, with a signature request. When the documents finally arrived, I wasn't surprised to find most of the complaints were anonymous, but a few had initials, JL being one of the most common, Jennifer L., my sister's old friend. That confirmed my suspicion. But what really caught my attention was how coordinated the complaints were. Same phrases, same tone, submitted within hours of one another. It wasn't organic. It was orchestrated. I dug into Jennifer next. I looked up public HOA meeting minutes, which are legally required to be available to homeowners. Turns out, Jennifer had only recently joined the board, 3 months ago, right around the time my problem started. Even more interesting? The HOA had amended several policies just after her appointment, including one that streamlined the complaint-to-fine process, removing the need for in-person inspection before issuing a penalty. That wasn't just shady, it was deliberate. Next, I looked into the other board members. Most were longtime residents with spotless reputations. But one name stood out, Marvin C., the HOA president. I discovered he ran a private property management business on the side, a business that had recently partnered with a house-flipping firm based 1 county over. I checked the business's public filings. Guess whose name showed up as a silent investor? Rachel! I sat back in my chair, stunned. It wasn't just pettiness. It was a plan. Rachel hadn't just gone whining to her friend. She had infiltrated the system, created financial leverage. The fines, the pressure, the cold shoulders. They were all part of a setup. If I sold under distress, that flipper firm could buy my house dirt cheap, flip it, and everyone involved would cash in. My house, my life, had become their business strategy. That night, I printed every document, screenshot every web page, and backed up every email. I made copies of everything and stored them in multiple places. I wasn't just fighting Rachel anymore. I was facing an alliance of people who had something to gain from my collapse. But now, I had names. I had proof. And for the first time since this all began, I felt like I had power again. When you're fighting a silent war, sometimes the only way to survive is to make noise. I had names, I had documents, I had timelines and motives, but what I didn't have was leverage. Until I realized the most powerful weapon I had wasn't legal. It was visibility. So, I went public. It started with a Reddit post, just a detailed write-up of what I'd been dealing with, minus the names. I explained the fines, the anonymous complaints, the odd connection between my sister, the HOA board, and a house-flipping company. I asked for advice, not sympathy, and I attached screenshots, blacked-out documents, and links to public records. It exploded. Thousands of upvotes, hundreds of comments. People shared their own HOA horror stories. Lawyers weighed in, telling me I had a case. One commenter claimed they'd seen the same flipping company try similar tactics in their town. The story got picked up by a small blogger who specialized in local real estate corruption. Then, a podcaster reached out. Then, a YouTube channel. The exposure lit a fire. Suddenly, I wasn't just a lone homeowner. I was a whistleblower, and the HOA? They weren't thrilled. I started getting letters demanding I remove false and defamatory content. They claimed I was endangering the reputation of the community. But the thing about truth is, it doesn't go away when someone tells you to shut up. I refused, and I doubled down. I submitted a formal complaint to the state HOA oversight body, attaching every shred of evidence I had. I even contacted a few local reporters. One of them, an investigative journalist named Caleb, was immediately interested. He'd covered corruption before and saw this for what it was, a systemic abuse of power hidden behind neighborhood politics. While the public pressure built, something amazing happened. Neighbors started talking, quietly, cautiously. A few of them knocked on my door. They had similar stories, fines that came out of nowhere, complaints that didn't make sense. Two of them had even been approached with offers to sell their homes as is for cash, by the same flipping firm Rachel was tied to. I wasn't alone. The ice around the neighborhood began to crack. People were starting to see the pattern, and the more we talked, the more obvious it became. This wasn't just about me. This was a scheme, and it had been in motion for months, maybe years. Rachel underestimated me. So did Jennifer. So did every smug board member who thought they could scare me into silence. Because now, my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to the internet, to the press, to every neighbor they tried to intimidate. And the more they tried to shut me up, the louder it all got. With the story now spreading online and my local community buzzing, I knew it was only a matter of time before the pushback came harder. And it did. I came home one afternoon to a thick envelope shoved under my door. It was from a law firm representing the HOA. Inside was a cease and desist letter filled with legal jargon, accusing me of defamation, incitement, and interfering with the operations of a legally recognized homeowners association. They gave me 7 days to remove all my posts, issue a public apology, and agree not to speak further about the matter. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was desperate. They were trying to bully me with paperwork. But I wasn't stupid. I hired a lawyer, a good one. She reviewed everything I had. And after one long meeting, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "This isn't just unethical. It could be criminal." Fraud, harassment, and conflict of interest were just the beginning. We drafted our response, firm, calm, and filled with receipts. We made it clear that I wasn't backing down and that any further attempts to intimidate me would be met with legal escalation of our own. The next move from the HOA? They tried to play the victim. They hosted a surprise community emergency meeting at the clubhouse, conveniently scheduled at a time most people were at work. But I showed up anyway, and I wasn't alone. Caleb, the journalist, came too. With a recorder and notebook in hand, a few neighbors sat quietly in the back, listening. Jennifer stood at the podium, spewing a carefully rehearsed speech about misinformation, online harassment, and the harm of sensationalism. She painted herself and the board as guardians of the neighborhood's dignity. Then I stood up. I introduced myself, calmly stated the facts, and handed out printed packets with everything I'd uncovered. The business ties, the timeline of fines, the anonymous complaints, even screenshots from Rachel's social media posts bragging about getting what she wants no matter what. They tried to shut me down, but it was too late. The room had shifted. After the meeting, I got a call from another neighbor, Greg, a soft-spoken guy who'd lived here for over a decade. He said something strange had happened to him a year ago. A series of sudden fines, then a push to sell. At the time, he thought it was just bad luck. Now, he wasn't so sure. It wasn't just a hunch anymore. We had patterns, victims, motives, and now We had legal backing. That week, my lawyer filed a formal notice of intent to sue the HOA and its board members for harassment, abuse of power, and violation of fiduciary duty. We also submitted a complaint to the State Attorney General's office, attaching every name, every fine, every false claim. This wasn't about fines anymore. This was about justice. And the people who thought they could hide behind rules and paperwork were about to find out what it felt like to be held accountable. After the emergency meeting, things started to change. Not fast, but enough to feel it. People who had avoided me for weeks began stopping by to check in or ask a quick question. They were cautious, but curious. I think seeing someone stand up and fight, especially when the HOA had always felt untouchable, lit a spark. That's when I got the idea to host a meeting of my own. Nothing official, no fancy banners, just coffee, folding chairs, and a flyer I left in a few mailboxes with the words, "Ever had a weird experience with the HOA? Let's talk." I didn't know if anyone would show up. 14 people came. We met in my backyard. I laid out my documents, shared my timeline, and invited others to speak freely. At first, it was quiet. Then Greg, soft-spoken Greg, stood up and told his story. His issues mirrored mine. Fines out of nowhere, shady offers to buy his house, being ignored when he asked questions. After him, a woman named Tanya spoke up. Her mailbox had been broken into twice. She'd been fined for a fence that hadn't changed in 10 years. Then Mark, who admitted he almost sold last year because the pressure got too intense. It was like a dam broke. We compared letters. We noticed the same handwriting, the same formatting, even the same phrases. Some people had never spoken to each other before that night. Now we were connecting dots that led to the same conclusion. This wasn't random enforcement. It was targeted. We decided to act together. Each of us submitted requests for complaint records, just like I had. We filed joint complaints with the state HOA oversight agency. A few even contacted the same journalist who had covered my story. Suddenly, it wasn't just me pushing back. It was a group, a united front. And that changed everything. The HOA started stumbling. They missed a filing deadline. Their responses became inconsistent. Their lawyer sent a second cease and desist. But this time, it was addressed to multiple people. The intimidation was starting to crack under the weight of collective resistance. We even created a private group chat where we could share updates and evidence. Someone found old HOA financial records showing suspicious payments for consulting that coincided with home sales. Another dug up a deleted post from the flipper company's website bragging about exclusive access to prime listings in tight markets. Rachel's name wasn't there, but Marvin's was. The circle was closing. There was one moment that hit me hard during all of this. Tanya came up to me after one of our backyard meetings and said, "I thought I was going crazy. I thought it was just me. You helped me see I'm not alone." That was it, right there. The HOA wanted isolation. They wanted silence. Because those things keep people scared. But together, we weren't scared anymore. We were angry. We were organized. And we were ready to bring the whole rotten thing into the light. With every meeting, every record request, and every connection we uncovered, the momentum shifted. What started as me versus a powerful HOA had evolved into something bigger, a full-blown neighborhood movement. And now, for the first time, we were on the offensive. We decided to escalate things with a strategic strike. An open letter, signed by more than a dozen homeowners, submitted to the HOA board and circulated throughout the neighborhood. It laid out our grievances in clear, undeniable detail. The suspicious fines, the financial conflicts of interest, the intimidation tactics, and the unethical relationships between board members and outside investors. We didn't demand an apology. We demanded action. Our demands were simple: an independent audit of the HOA's finances, immediate suspension of any board member with a financial conflict, a freeze on all fines until the audit was complete, a vote to recall board members under investigation. Once the letter went public, it spread fast. The rest of the neighborhood, people who had stayed quiet, began taking sides. Some still clung to the illusion of the HOA's authority, but many more were done being afraid. The board called for a closed-door emergency session to discuss recent unrest, but it was too late for secrecy. Someone on the inside leaked the meeting notes. Jennifer reportedly broke down in tears, accusing everyone of turning against her. Marvin threatened legal action against anyone continuing to defame the board. One member quietly resigned the next day. Meanwhile, my lawyer kept pushing forward with the lawsuit. She gathered testimonies from other neighbors, filed discovery motions, and requested emails and communication logs between board members and the flipping firm. Subpoenas started flying. Then came the breakthrough. Caleb, the journalist, published a detailed exposé tying Marvin's property management business directly to Rachel's flipper company, tax documents, overlapping staff, even shared office space. It was undeniable. The story got picked up by a larger outlet, and suddenly the HOA was under public scrutiny from outside the community. That's when the real cracks appeared. The HOA's insurance carrier launched an internal review. The oversight agency we'd filed complaints with announced a formal investigation. And Rachel? She went dark, deleted her social media, stopped answering calls. The flipping firm removed Marvin's name from their website, but screenshots had already circulated. We weren't just defending ourselves anymore. We were dismantling the structure they built to exploit us. And as their defenses crumbled, the energy in the neighborhood shifted completely. People who used to glance away now nodded in solidarity. A few even offered to help with legal costs, volunteer for future elections, or provide professional services like accounting and real estate consultation. It was more than just justice. It was transformation. The tables had turned, and we weren't backing down until the entire truth was exposed and every bad actor was held accountable. It all came to a head one Tuesday evening. The HOA had no choice but to hold an open community meeting after the pressure we'd built became undeniable. Over 60 residents showed up, more than triple their usual turnout. The tension in the room was thick. Marvin looked tired, worn out, and for once, silent. Jennifer wasn't even present. The board had tried to delay the vote to recall its members, citing procedural issues, but too many of us knew the bylaws by now. We called them out, publicly, calmly, and with proof. The lawyer I'd hired even made a short appearance, reminding them on record that any obstruction of community votes could be grounds for additional legal action. One by one, homeowners stood up and shared their stories. Some shook with anger, others with relief. But they spoke, and that alone broke the silence that had protected the board for so long. Then came the vote. By an overwhelming margin, Marvin and Jennifer were both removed from the board. 2 other members resigned on the spot, clearly wanting no part in what came next. The interim leadership was made up of volunteers from the community, people who had been on the receiving end of the board's abuse, people we trusted. That would have been enough, but it didn't stop there. 2 days later, the results of the independent audit were released. Thanks to a whistleblower inside the board who handed off the records before they were mysteriously lost. It was worse than we expected. Tens of thousands of dollars in HOA funds had been funneled into consulting fees for Marvin's business. Several fines had been illegally escalated without cause, and the flipping company tied to Rachel, it had purchased 3 homes in the past year, each from homeowners who had been aggressively fined and pressured until they sold. The findings were sent to the state attorney general's office and the local DA. An investigation was formally opened into Marvin, Jennifer, and Rachel's business. Charges were pending, and subpoenas were being served. It felt surreal, watching the people who had tried to force me out now facing real consequences. As for Rachel, the silence between us was permanent now. She tried to reach out. Once, a short, vague text. I didn't know it would go that far. I didn't respond, because she did know. She started the fire. She just never expected it to spread this far or burn down her own plans. The final blow came not from rage, not from vengeance, but from truth and persistence and unity. What they underestimated was how powerful a community can be when it wakes up. In the weeks following the fallout, the neighborhood slowly returned to something that felt like normal. The fines stopped, the harassment vanished, people started planting flowers again, kids rode their bikes without changing routes, and for the first time in months, I drank coffee on my porch without feeling watched. The new HOA board was transparent and communicative. They held regular town halls, shared financial reports, and even asked the community for input before making changes. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and that made all the difference. As for me, I kept my house, I didn't move, I didn't cave, and I didn't sell. And that bird bath? It's still there, still slightly crooked, and I keep it that way on purpose now. A reminder that some things shouldn't be corrected just because they don't fit someone else's idea of perfection. People started treating me differently, too. Not like a pariah, but like someone who stood up when things got ugly. Some neighbors apologized. Others just started conversations where, before there had only been silence. I didn't hold grudges, but I didn't forget either. Rachel disappeared from my life completely. No more texts, no calls. And honestly, I was fine with that. She made her choice. She tried to weaponize our relationship and underestimated how far I was willing to go to protect my life, my peace, and my home. I learned a lot during those months about people, about power, and especially about what happens when systems designed to protect can be corrupted from within. But the biggest lesson? You don't have to scream to be heard. You just have to keep showing up, keep speaking, keep pushing back when something feels wrong, even when no one else sees it yet. This house isn't just where I live. It's where I made a stand. It's where I proved that no matter how small you feel, the truth, once it gets momentum, is louder than anything fear can throw at you. So if you're watching this and going through something similar, remember this: you're not crazy, you're not overreacting, and you are absolutely not alone. And if you ever feel like giving up, don't. Because the moment you stop letting them win is the moment everything changes. If this story helped you, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that matter. Your voice counts. Let's keep using it.